Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another pre-recorded lesson video. I have a couple of announcements before we get started. I hope everyone had a good long weekend. Hopefully you're well rested because this week is going to be a pretty busy week. I'm trying to finish the book either this week, but that might be a bit of a stretch. So at the latest, I would like to finish this midpoint of next week, if that is possible. Because STAR testing is going to dominate most of early May, and I'm going to assume, and I think this is a very safe assumption, that a lot of you are going to get very lazy after STAR testing, and that's perfectly fine because those are the big tests, right? Because I bet you there's going to be a part of me that gets a little bit lazy after STAR testing as well. It just happens to everybody. So let's try to buckle down. The attendance for the live meetings are a bit upsetting, right? But that's why I've been uploading the pre-recorded lesson videos, right? So that y'all can still learn and catch up at your own pace. However, the views on the live videos are not great. Like the views on YouTube for the 4-6 lesson video that I uploaded yesterday are only at 3 views, right? That is not great. That is unacceptable. I will be making calls home and sending out a Schoology message. So please make sure that you're doing that, because I did upload a chapter 1 through 5 quiz to make sure that y'all are keeping up with the reading videos. You're reading by yourself if you have the physical copy of the book. And so far, the grades have not been great. So please make sure that you are keeping up with the reading, because a major grade is coming out this week. And if you're not keeping up with the book, you're not going to be able to pass, right? So please make sure you're doing that. And if you have any questions about the videos or the PowerPoints, obviously message me on Schoology or email me, and I'll answer those as quickly as I possibly can. Grades are finalizing this Friday for progress reports. So if you are failing, I will be calling home to notify your guardians of your grades and what's happening so far, okay? But that's basically it for the announcements. Let's review a little bit. Yesterday was April 6th. It was lesson 7, I believe. And lesson 7 was mainly about chapter 5. Chapter 5 was Claudette and her trial. And she gets found guilty of all 3 charges, which are disturbing the peace, assaulting a police officer, and breaking segregation laws, right? And this upsets Claudette Colvin, because now she has a police record, and whenever it's going to be very hard for her to apply to colleges, apply for jobs, any type of thing that she does in her life that requires a background check, the police record will come up, right? And it's going to very much hinder her. A lot of key figures gets introduced. Fred Gray, her lawyer. He's 24 at that time. He's one of 2 black lawyers in Montgomery. Who else? Joanne Robinson, the president of the Women's Political Committee or Women's Political Council. She's a big figure in the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks gets introduced, who is currently the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gets introduced. He is a pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He is 26 at this time. And the last figure to get introduced is E.D. Nixon. He introduced Claudette Colvin to Fred Gray. He is a massive civil rights activist at this time as well. They are all coming back up in today's lesson, so please keep an eye out for them while you're going through the reading video. What else? Oh, big thing. I either misread or misinterpreted the book while I was reading it myself. Claudette is not pregnant at this time. She gets pregnant a couple months after her arrest. So she is pregnant, especially during all this chaotic times, but not during the time of her arrest. Okay, and that comes up, I think, in chapter 8 or chapter 7 or 8. One of those two chapters, it comes back up. Okay? So that's basically the big things. Chapter 5, another big thing is that maybe the biggest thing is that in the beginning, after Claudette does this, and before her trial, people are behind her, right? They support her. They think she's very brave, and it took a lot of courage to do what she did. But there's a lot of conflicting opinions around her. A lot of adults are concerned because it may make life harder for them. And they're also embarrassed because a teenager did what they should have done years ago, right? A 15-year-old little girl or teenage girl took a stand on the bus when even adults couldn't do that. And they are embarrassed about that fact, okay? So that's a big thing to know. After her trial and she gets found guilty, the people at her school turn against her. They whisper about her. They make fun of her. They bully her, right? That's how quick public opinion changed about Claudette Colvin. People find her too emotional, a little bit crazy now, okay? But that's basically it for chapter 5. We are moving on to today's lesson. As you can see, we are skipping ahead quite a bit. Focusing question changed. It is what role did Claudette Colvin and others play in the civil rights movement? So while Claudette Colvin is still our main focus, other main characters or major characters are going to come into play now. And remember, this is a nonfiction book. So all of these characters that get introduced are all real people. Sorry about that, y'all. A teacher came up to my door, so I had to go answer it. But like I was saying, we're going to be focusing on other people. This is a nonfiction book, so all the people that get introduced are real people, right? They changed the history of this country and fought for justice, right? Then the content framing question for lesson 10, we are on lesson 10 today, is what's happening in chapter 6. That is the chapter that we are going to be reading and focusing on today, okay? The learning goal is y'all are going to be able to summarize effects of events in Montgomery on Claudette and her community. And we are going to be introducing the stories of Mary Louise Smith and Emmett Till. And those two stories that get introduced in chapter 6 should tell you what it was like back then, especially for teens, because Mary Louise Smith is 18, Emmett Till is 14, okay? So let us get started. Before y'all watch the reading video of chapter 6, I want you to focus on this word, social change. Remember, that's a part of our essential question for this module is how do people affect social change, right? Remember, social change is a group action or organized activities of a group that strive towards a common goal around social change. So it also means people taking action to either change the social or cultural rules of a society. So we're going to be examining Claudette's actions in a very larger context and how Claudette's actions and her emotions and her mindset fit into the bigger picture of the social movement at her time, which is the civil rights movement, right? Other examples of social change are the LGBTQ plus movement, the feminist movement, the women's rights movement, what else? The green movement, right? Those are all examples of social change, okay? Let us go. Then chapter 6, as always, I always upload the videos of the reading in the folder for the day. So the video for chapter 6 will be uploaded in the April 7th folder, the 4-7 folder, okay? So please watch those because I will be uploading a major grade tomorrow at 4-8. So please do that. So take some time, go watch that video and come back, pause it, whatever, just watch that video. It's very important that you catch up on this book. But one of the, as always, after you watch it, the rest of the PowerPoint is going to be about the main ideas or the key ideas of what is happening in that chapter. One of the biggest things is found on page 53, which is called appealing a legal decision. So the hierarchy of the court system is pretty easy. There are 4 main parts. So the lowest level is the local city level. That is where Claudette's case is in chapter 5. It is at the city level, the local level of Montgomery. And Claudette ends up losing at that local level. So what an option that she could have is she can appeal her decision, right? Which is what appeal means in this context is trying to reverse the court's decision, the court's ruling. So she got found guilty. She can appeal to try to get found not guilty at the next level with a new judge. So it goes from the local level, and if they decide to appeal, they take it to the state level, so which is Alabama. And then if they lose at the state level with that new judge, what happens is they appeal again, and they take it to the federal level, which is sort of like the central government, sort of like the U.S., if that makes sense, like the country. And there are usually 3 judges for an appeal at the federal level. And if they lose at the federal level, they can take it and appeal it to the highest court in the country, which is the Supreme Court. And whatever the Supreme Court says goes. Their ruling goes because they are the highest level. So the definition of appeal is applied to a higher court for reversal of the decision of a lower court. So Claudette wants to appeal her decision, right? Because she thinks that she is not guilty. Her lawyer, Fred Gray, wants to appeal the decision. However, something happens that the lower local courts does, a judge, that makes it hard for them to appeal. And what happens is one of the judges looks at her case and decides to drop 2 out of the 3 charges against her. So they drop disturbing the peace and breaking segregation laws. So they basically find her, they take away those charges and say, you know what, those 2 charges aren't going to be on your record. So the only charge that she has against her is assaulting a police officer. This makes it very hard for Fred Gray and the civil rights movement leaders to appeal, because the only reason that they decided to take this case to court and plead not guilty, right, was because they wanted to challenge the segregation laws in court. This is the first time that they've been allowed to challenge the laws of segregation in a court setting and try to get those laws removed. But since that charge got dropped and the only charge left is assaulting a police officer, they can't challenge those legal laws or the segregation laws. So they decide not to appeal to the state level. This frustrates Claudette because she knows that she's not guilty. And while she may have 2 out of the 3 charges dropped against her, she still has 1 charge. And that charge, assaulting a police officer, still leaves a police record against her, which still makes it very hard for her to get a job, apply to colleges, or anything else that needs a background check. Okay? So they decide not to take it to the state, and they decide to just leave it. And what this does, it infuriates Claudette. She's very sad at this point. Everyone in her school is turning against her, making fun of her. And it sort of drives her into sort of a depression and leads her to do some drastic changes in her life. And some of the major events or the changes I'm about to talk about is, number 1, the major event so far is Claudette's guilty verdict, Claudette's appeal or lack of an appeal, and Claudette's decision not to straighten her hair. After all this happens, Claudette realizes, why would I straighten my hair if they can't straighten out this mess? So she decides not to straighten her hair anymore, and the popular hair at that time was to be almost white, right? It has to be straight, it has to look soft, it can't be rough, can't be curly. Right, so she decides not to straighten her hair, and this causes the people at her school to look at her crazy. They're like, why are you doing your hair like that? Why are you doing this and drawing more attention to yourself? And Claudette, her exact quotes were, my hair looks African, and my African culture and my African roots are something that I should be proud of and find beautiful instead of being ashamed of. And they were taught back then to be ashamed of their past, their history, their culture, where they're from, right? You should always be proud of your culture and your family's culture, your ancestors' cultures. I'm from South Korea. I'm very proud of my Asian culture and my Asian heritage and in South Korea. I'm very proud of it. And Claudette is learning to be proud of it as well. And then Claudette also attends a lot of NAACP meetings with Rosa Parks during this chapter. And this, at first, was a great thing for her. Then she realizes the other teens that attend these meetings, they're not like her. They're from a different neighborhood. They go to private schools. Their families most likely have cars instead of having to ride the bus. They're better off and well off than Claudette is. And this makes Claudette realize that, hey, we sort of are not the same, right? They don't understand the struggle I'm going through. They don't understand why I'm fighting. And this drives Claudette to have an effect or a mindset of loneliness and depression. There's not a lot of people that she can turn to at this time. She's lonely, she's frustrated, because a lot of people in her life, her classmates, other civil rights leaders, feel like that she's not capable of being that figure of change for the civil rights movement, or they just think that she's crazy or too emotional, right? Again, Claudette did not have a lot of people she could turn to or identify with. There's one person that stuck around, and it is Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was a key figure in Claudette's life, and Rosa Parks was one of the main civil rights leaders that kept in touch with her. Okay? So here's some quotes that sort of show the public opinion of Claudette. It says, it is easier to see the bus girl, Claudette, as a troublemaker than as a pioneer. So how do these two words help you understand what's happening with Claudette Colvin? You sort of have to consider how the civil rights is developing, right? They need a key figure that they can push to the front and be the face of bus boycotts and fighting against segregation laws. And they thought Claudette was this pioneer, this figure. But now people are just seeing her as a troublemaker, too emotional, crazy, not strong enough, not experienced enough to lead that fight. So instead of them seeing her as a pioneer, which is a pioneer means the first to do something, a trailblazer, someone making history, they see her as a troublemaker instead and not worth that trouble. So the civil rights leader sort of throws her out at this point. They don't really appreciate, they appreciate what Claudette did, but they don't take it further and make her the face of the movement. If that makes sense. Right? So again, this drives Claudette to be a little bit lonely, a little bit depressed, draw in with herself, and not socialize with the outside world. So now we focus, remember this is the focusing question is how did Claudette Colvin and others contribute to the civil rights movement? And we focus on Claudette Colvin and how she is doing emotionally during chapter 6 and during this time. Now we're going to focus on others. And others, there's going to be two groups we're going to focus on. One is the civil rights leaders, and the other one are other teenagers in this book. So the others, for the leaders, here's some quotes that have to do with Claudette Colvin, or their opinions on Claudette Colvin, right? So E.D. Nixon on page 52 says, I had to be sure that I had somebody I could win with. They weren't sure that they could win with Claudette Colvin in court or trying to break down these segregation laws, right? They needed to be sure it was a sure thing because they may most likely only got one chance at this, right? So they had to be sure they had somebody that was a sure thing that they could win and sort of rally people, get people on their side, right? Someone that had a lot of charisma, a lot of charm, a lot of experience. Joanne Robinson says, opinions differed where Claudette was concerned. And opinions basically meant by the civil rights leaders. A lot of civil rights leaders didn't think Claudette was that person. E.D. Nixon was one of them. Joanne Robinson wasn't sure. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't sure, right? A lot of civil rights leaders did not think Claudette Colvin was the person to be able to lead them into winning against segregation laws. Martin Luther King Jr. says, the inaction of the city and bus officials after the Colvin case would make it necessary for them to meet another committee. So Martin Luther King Jr. knows that Claudette started this, right? Claudette's the first person to challenge these laws in court and plead not guilty. So Martin Luther King Jr. knows that Claudette was the key the catalyst for this movement, but he himself knows that she won't be able to be the one that leads them. And again, a couple months down the road, Rosa Parks does the same thing Claudette did, and Rosa Parks becomes that figure for a lot of people. So what is happening with the adult leaders of the civil rights movement during this time, and their opinions of Claudette? They're split. They really don't know. They all have various opinions. They don't know if Claudette is the one or the right person to be the figure of their movement. They don't know what Claudette's role is going to be going forward, especially since she was found guilty. And they can't challenge these laws anymore in court since breaking the segregation law was dropped. So they don't know. And for teens, the big figure is Emmett Till. So Emmett Till is a 14-year-old that is from Chicago, and he visits Mississippi in the summer of 1955 to visit some family in Mississippi, right? And allegedly, he whistles at a store clerk, a white store worker, and 3 days later, he gets kidnapped by that store worker's brother and a friend. And then 3 days after that, he gets found. His body gets found in the river, wrapped in barbed wire and mutilated. Mutilated means just messed up beyond repair. They can't even recognize him anymore. So what they do to him is they torture him, they beat him, wrap him in barbed wire, shoot him in the head, and dump him in the river. Right? He's 14 years old. And how they describe this in chapter 6 is grotesquely, savagery, and chilling. Grotesquely is in a very gross, disgusting, revolting way. Savagery is, y'all know what savage means, lacking like human sympathy or kindness, and chilling means horrifying, very scary. So how do these words help you understand how these events affected the Black community in Montgomery? They were terrified. Emmett Till gets massacred, murdered for allegedly whistling. That's not even a crime. He's 14 years old. So they are scared, because if this happens to a 14-year-old that did absolutely nothing, they're thinking, what is going to happen to us if we try to challenge these segregation laws and boycott these buses, right? We're making some noise. Emmett Till didn't do anything. What if the KKK comes after us and our family, or whatever, if any white person comes after us or our families? They're terrified. And the two people that killed Emmett Till, they don't get found guilty. They get acquitted. The jury, an all-white jury, found them not guilty. And those two actually admit to killing Emmett Till the next, or a couple months after they get found not guilty. And they can't get tried again. So how does the precise word of allegedly help you understand the role of bias in Emmett Till's story? We don't even know if he whistled at that white store worker. That white store worker could have made that story up, and people still believe them. That shows a bias against Emmett Till, and the bias against Black people during that time in the South, right? There's only one true fact. Everything else in the story is allegedly. There is one true fact, is that Emmett Till was murdered, right? And the people that did it got found not guilty. That's absolutely outrageous in the story. It's one of the saddest stories in American history. I highly recommend you read up on that by yourself in your own free time, because it will make you angry. It will frustrate you as well. Another teen that gets shown in this is Mary Louise Smith. So Mary Louise Smith, on October 21st, I think 7 months after Claudette Colvin gets arrested, also gets arrested for not giving up her seat. She's 18 years old. So how Mary Louise Smith story compares, the similarities are they both get arrested for not giving up their seat, and they're both found unfit to be the public face of a mass bus protest by the civil rights leaders. The differences in their story is that Mary Louise Smith was angry at the bus, and she does something Claudette doesn't do. She cusses out one of the bus drivers, and she pays her fine. Instead of challenging this court, she just pays the fine, gets it taken off her record, and she moves on. This makes it so the civil rights leaders can't take her can't take her case to court and challenge the laws. So the civil rights leader brand Mary Louise Smith as unfit. And there were a lot of rumors floating around Mary Louise Smith at that time, where her father was a drunk, she was poor, she lived in a shack. When all of those were untrue, her father didn't drink. She lived in a 2-story house, 3-bedroom. So that similarity was also the same with Claudette, because Claudette had a lot of rumors spread about her as well. So that's basically it for chapter 6. Hopefully this makes sense. The biggest thing is Claudette's mindset at that time, what the civil rights leaders thought about her, and the stories of the 2 teenagers in this chapter. If you have any questions, obviously let me know. I will be uploading that major grade tomorrow, so keep a lookout for that. But other than that, that's it for this lesson video, and I'll see you here for the next one.